Welcome to the Leaders Mindset Live. We're back bringing you a great guest here in a live episode, these illuminating conversations that we love to have with people who are making an impact in their jobs, in their families, in their communities. So the nice part about being live is that we can see you here and we can see your comments and your questions as we're going live. So go ahead, put those questions in the chat. We want to hear from you as we're having this conversation. Today, our guest is new friend of mine, but good friend of mine, Dean Fisher. He's the meeting broker at Meetings Made Easy. I'm not going to try to explain what that is to you. I'm going to let him do that. But what you need to know right now is that a few years ago, Dean left a pretty lucrative and cushy career as an executive for the resorts here in Las Vegas and the hospitality industry. And he left that to go be self-employed, to become a self-employed CEO. So, Dean, thanks so much for being here. Tell us what a meeting broker is, who you help, what problems do you solve for them? Give us the whole nine on that.
Jason, it's great to spend some time with you today. Thank you for making some room on your podcast for this conversation. Should be a beautiful day. It's gorgeous up here in Northern Nevada right now. The question you just asked me is something that I think is continuing to evolve in our industry. What is a meeting broker? The nuts and bolts of it is you can consider it kind of like I am the contractor in a scenario and my clients are the decorators. So I go in for event business, corporate style, incentive style, basically anything where a client is looking for space, meeting space, they're looking for guest rooms, and they need a destination where they can take this team or this conference to. My role is to go into those regions, associate the best deals for them, advise them on how to create the best conference setting when it comes to flight, lift, getting to the hotels, basically the overall feeling of how it should be that the conference would run as an advisory. And then I negotiate the contracts for them so that they're protected. And they know that they have avenues or options as it evolves in case the industry we're in changes or their business model changes. But essentially, I'm their protector. I make sure that the deal is in the best situation it can be. And uniquely enough in our industry, the hotels pay commissions to my company for that. So I'm essentially a resource that they don't have to pay for, believe it or not. From there, it grows into whether they need events teams, they need holes plugged in their process of planning. They're looking for support in regional scenarios with DMCs or travel. I am the connector, essentially, is what it's turned out to be. And most of my clients will reach out to me if they have an issue, and they're looking for solutions in a very fast and efficient manner. This has come from years of experience on the hotel side, which I know we're going to get into, but I'm just enjoying the heck out of being able to advise and give my clients the best opportunity to bring their ROI forward and make sure that they're protected the best they can be.
That sounds fantastic. When we first started talking about what it is you do, what a meeting broker is, I got in my mind, like when we were in the Air Force, if we had done something like this, had a conference like this, we would have assigned like a junior or mid-level captain to go figure all this out. And they don't know how to plan a meeting. They know flying airplanes and Air Force stuff and that kind of stuff. So we would have assigned them to do that. And I thought that's kind of what you were doing, was taking the place of like the in-person rep. But what I'm really fascinated about is that the resorts pay you, not your clients.
Yeah.
And what I'd love to dig into there is what makes this such an advantage for the resorts that they're willing to pay you to do this work for somebody else.
Yeah. It's great for you to dig into it that way. I like to explain it like this. There's 3 avenues of connecting with a hotel and discussing an event, resort, or conference style setting. The first is the knock on the front door. Like you said, when you were in your business, you had somebody that picked up the phone, dialed hotels, asked for the actual department itself, and then had a conversation with them what their hopes were, and then they got a proposal back, and that's a front door conversation. There's also the second level where you would have an experienced individual making the same steps and going into the same equation, and the hotel would recognize that representative as being knowledgeable and most likely offer them a little better deal or a little more understanding towards the industry, what's expected as far as concessions and returns. And then there comes my world, which is a third-party scenario where we're actually connected through national relationships with all the hotel brands. So when I reach out to a hotel, it's not through the front door, it's actually through a back door. It's in a system where I can essentially go into any region and pull 100 different hotels and get 100 answers in 48 hours for all my clients in a succinct manner, where they can really take and assess the cost in that region against it, and maybe multiple regions, so they can make a decision in a very quick manner. Why it's efficient for the hotels is because we essentially qualify the business for our clients. So as much as I'm a resource for my clients, I'm a resource for the hotel, because that language of speaking hotel language and client language does not always come together the right way. It's client language sometimes is related to other industries, how they approach going to restaurants, retail, anything of that nature. But when you're working with the hotel industry, it's a business model that has a lot of nuances to it that aren't always upfront and obvious. And the hotels don't generally want to explain this to you. So they just set margins in certain places, and they expect you to understand that that's what it's going to cost. But the truth is, if you know the back end of how the hotel's running and their cost, there are a lot of soft costs. There's a lot of nuances that can be worked through if you have the understanding to have a relationship conversation with a hotel that's valuable for them and also valuable for the client. And now you're creating mutual business that's really actionable. And the hotels see this as a value because their teams aren't taxed with having to do this. So if you think about somebody that's really new in the business, that's trying to take a conference to ABC Hotel in, let's say, New York, they're calling an experienced salesperson that understands what the deal should be. However, they're not able to ask the questions in a way that makes the business succinct. So it becomes very tedious for the salesperson to have to educate the client constantly on what the next steps need to be or how the outcome should be. My role is to ensure the hotel that my clients are aware of this already, and that if there's any friction points in the middle, my job as a broker is to find the best deal for the hotel and the best deal for the client, so that there's a mutual understanding in the middle that's valuable for both. The hotels see us essentially as an extension of their sales teams as well. So we're able to offset that labor, and that's why the commission status is in place. It was put in place, as far as I know, in the beginning of time when it came to hotels. When I was on the hotel side, I actually had a P&L line item that paid commissions to third parties in these scenarios because they brought in about 40% of the business into Bellagio. And we saw them as revenue sources. So we definitely made sure that they were taken care of and that their business knew that we were respectful to their involvement. And that commission had nothing to do with the actual deal between the client and the hotel. It's set aside essentially understanding that their teams are bolstered and have a stronger input into the industry by having us involved.
That's fantastic. I think you really hit it on the head. Answered my question when you said you pre-qualify your clients for the hotels, and I never thought of it from that perspective. Is that, yes, it's time and frustration for someone in a company to try to go figure out how to work with the hotel, but there also is that frustration factor of someone working with the hotel because they field these calls all day long asking the same question over and over, and you're handling all those really basic questions probably in your initial client questionnaire when someone first approaches you.
Yeah, the truth is, Jason, when a client comes to me with even a thought, like let's say what's the cost of going to Denver in the spring versus going to Miami in the spring versus going to Dallas in the spring, I can essentially advise them on average room rates before we even source the grouping, just because of the knowledge base that I understand of working in these areas over and over and over again through the years, to tell you that this is how the regions are going to compare to each other. This is where your benefit's going to be when it comes to flight and lift. Maybe your costs go up in this area because you have to take 2 flights versus 1, where Dallas comes more in play, or Miami. All this in my world is vetted out so that the clients can go back to their CEOs, their decision makers very quickly, give them information they can use to make a more succinct decision and move towards that actual destination. Once we get in that destination, then it becomes fun. We go shopping. Essentially, we're looking at the value of these hotels and their status of a 3 to 5 diamond scenario, and how their service outcomes are going to be accomplished or not accomplished depending on the circumstance. So if you're in a tier 1 city and you're taking medium pricing, there's a chance your service outcome is going to be subject to some issues during that conference, just because naturally in our industry, labor hasn't come back 100%. The industry hasn't come to full, on all full cylinders in each of those hotels at 100%. So they're working margins, where if you're going into a higher brand, a higher price scenario in one of those tier 1 cities, they already have their labor in place. They've been actually working on getting through this after the pandemic, and they're actually at full cylinder, hitting 100%. And your service outcomes are going to be a lot stronger and less of a worry. Well, where's the cost on the front end come into the outcome on the back end if there was a failure? This, a lot of times for me, is where I spend a lot of my educational hours with my clients, is helping them understand how to set this budget on the front end. So on the back end, there is no failures that cost them money. And they can really find and associate and fine tune this conference, even if it's taking it out of a tier 1 and putting it in a tier 2 city, just because they're going to get more value impact for the hotels they're staying in.
And what I love about what you're saying, reading between the lines a little bit, is what you're doing is you're letting the executives of that company, you're letting their conference organizers, you're letting them focus on what they want to get across to their attendees at their conference, what they want all their attendees to take away. And they don't have to worry about the logistics of it because Dino's taking care of it, right?
That's absolutely right. That's really where the buck stops, and we find these great value connections. Most of my clients are tremendous meeting planners, experienced to the hilt, and I would never get in their way. But relationships in our industry and how to put the best scenario together to give them the opportunity to plan this meeting the best they can, that's my world. That's where years of being in handshake situations and actually going out and traveling the world personally, like I have over the last 4 years, has put me in a great position to be able to just make these introductions and ensure that there's people behind it that really have the effort and the knowledge base and the willingness to bring forward this outcome that they're looking for as a success.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of folks out there who are really glad that you're out there looking out for them. So that's where we are today. You're filling people's needs. You're letting them focus on the things they need to be focused on so they can have a great time at their events. How did you get started in the industry? Let's go back to the beginnings. How did you get into hospitality? Did you start in meetings? Let's go back. Set the Wayback Machine.
I am a big lover of the universe, and I can tell you that as I look back, all the factors were for reasons that came out in the end. I can look back on and say there were this was no mistake. And so it started essentially when I was in college up in Reno, and believe it or not, I'm up here living in this area now. So how that comes together, I was in moving furniture coming out of high school. Believe it or not, I worked for a company. And we would haul long-range furniture scenarios, home movements, different things of that nature. And when I went to college in Reno, I started looking for employment, not knowing what I was going to do. And I found a hotel, which I'm very near and dear to, the El Dorado Hotel and Casino up in Reno. And they hired me as my first service industry job as a busboy. And I fell in love with the idea of essentially making money and helping people enjoy their time. And being a waiter was something I really took seriously over the years. I was able to get into fine dining rooms, and I took it as a profession that I was very proud of. And it really helped my wife and I raise our kids over the years. That led me into understanding how hotels worked and what that meant. And I ended up in restaurant management. I was the general manager of the California Pizza Kitchen at the Golden Nugget, as I guess one of my first status jobs, I would say. And that was where things really started in my life, is what a leader was, how to become a leader versus being a manager, and what those differences were, and evolving. And because of those experiences, I eventually left the Golden Nugget and ended up at the Mirage in the banquet team, running the banquet department for about 7 years. And in those days, we had the luxury of opening the Love Show, doing so many amazing things at the Mirage that it was just in its right time and pinnacle. And after that 7 years, I was invited to come and speak with the executive director of catering at the Bellagio. Harvey Stern is an amazing mentor of mine, and we spent 7 years together, essentially running the highest end events in Las Vegas. And that led me to my executive career and actually running the team at Bellagio and knowing how to lead their efforts and creating the best outcomes for the hotel, and not actually putting my spin on it every time I had a client. That took me to pretty much to the end of this career with the hotel industry that I know you want to dig out as we go into this conversation, but led me to where I'm at now, making that big choice to get out here.
Yeah, I do want to dig into that. I have a couple more questions about your hotel days, though. What was your favorite conference or meeting to work with while you were working in the industry inside the hotels?
It was Virtuoso. Every year we had an event for high-end travel that would come to Bellagio, and we would use multiple hotels. And I had the pleasure of overseeing this conference from Bellagio and Aria. For almost 7 years, we did it. And this is the highest end in luxury travel. Virtuoso is essentially in their own market, a third party that helps bring together that business. And just to have the ability to offer services and show off, we'll say at that point, Bellagio to these individuals, and know that they've seen the best in the world and come back the following year and tell us how great we are. It really is one of those places that we were in. I used to say we got this chance to paint on a Picasso every day, where a lot of people in the industry, they were out there trying to find the actual canvas itself. You know, the money wasn't there. But at Bellagio, we were very lucky because our groups had budgets. And so they would come in and they would spend a lot of money to entertain and create these conferences in a certain way. And so I got really used to dealing with 10,000 people and $100 million in revenue in 2 weeks, and what that takes to get through to the next year, which is a day in, day out process after it left. It was almost a 12-month planning process to get that group up every year.
I don't doubt. I imagine that you guys basically started planning for next year the day after it ended that year.
It's for sure.
That sounds fantastic. No, you have to wait. Do you want to be on the video? My dog is looking at me. So if she gets real nervous, I'll let you talk, and then I'll run off and let her out. But I'm trying to avoid that.
The second group I did every year that I really loved was Skybridge Capital. We did the SALT conference, and if anybody remembers Anthony Scaramucci, he was in that short stint with Donald Trump, where he's this press guy, and then he wasn't 10 days later. Anthony and I became very close over the years. We ran this event with his team and just had an amazing time at the highest end, highest levels. If there weren't generals and dignitaries at his VIP dinner every year, you know, it was something. The concert, I mean, I can name off about 10 different high-end acts that they would do over the years. And one of my favorites was Adam Levine with his band. I mean, really, truly, they came in and just made things feel like you were at the right place at the right time. Lenny Kravitz was incredible. I said when I got to see the Killers play for SALT, I became a huge fan. If you ever get a chance to see them in a private setting for 500 people, you'll know what I'm saying.
I've never seen them, but I would, in that setting or any setting, I would love to see them. And you know, we all love the Killers because they're a local band here in Las Vegas, so we all have a lot of love for them anyway. So I'll go see them anytime, anywhere. So we talked about your path a little bit, the jobs you had up to a leadership role as an executive at Bellagio, but how did you rise up to be a leader? What qualities did you have? What qualities did you foster? What do you think was important in how you did your job, how you thought about how you thought about doing your job, how you worked with people to rise to that position?
Sure. I think that instinctively in me, I always had something that people gathered around. I never could quite understand it. Even when I was in Boy Scouts, I turned out to be a leader in Boy Scouts. And through high school and sports and academics and all the way into my work career, I found that there were people around me that would ask me questions all the time for answers. And I never really quite understood. But later, getting into more of a corporate setting, it became obvious that I had the ability to manage people. Now, that's a talent. To learn how to be a leader is a whole different thing. Managing people is essentially just having a vision and an outcome and knowing how to accomplish that goal to get them there. And it can be a little rough. Sometimes it's not the best for the people that are in the team, and it doesn't necessarily come out the way that you would hope. But evolving to leadership, now that's a whole different deal. And I have to give a lot of credit to, you know, MGM Resorts International. I came up as a baby through Mirage Events, which was Steve Wynn's company, and we merged with MGM 20 years ago or so. And when those came together, the structure of opportunity and training really started to present itself. In those days, we had great mentors in our company, the top of the top, best of the best. A lot of them had come out of Four Seasons. A lot of us were just nurtured in Las Vegas under these casino moguls. But what they really were focused on is growing us as human beings into the best leaders we could be. And they offered instructional classes that had a lot to do with emotional intelligence, not necessarily focusing on what you could get done, but how you got it done. And I bit hook, line, and sinker. I'm just a human nature guy. So I really enjoy being in scenarios where I could help people grow and be their best selves, which obviously is translated out here. What really became a challenge is learning how to be a leader.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the mergers and consolidation. That was definitely something I wanted to ask you about, because I was stationed here in the Air Force from 2002 to 2007. So I moved here just kind of as all those mergers and consolidations were beginning down on the Strip. And I certainly had a perspective as an outside observer, but I'd love to hear what your perspective was as someone who was inside the industry at the working level and moving up during that time period.
Yeah.
What did you notice about, whether it was about leadership development, whether it was about how the companies, if culture changed, what was your perspective going through that whole Strip ownership consolidation phase about 20 years ago?
Well, my first introduction to leadership was in a small talk I had with this gentleman who I respect over the years at the Golden Nugget. His name's Jim Kinsella. And I had just come into my general manager's role at the California Pizza Kitchen. And I noticed that the operational VP that had just been promoted was the actual food and beverage VP before that. And I didn't understand, how does somebody in food and beverage that spent 25 years move into an operational role in the front of the hotel, knowing that those are two totally different business models? And he said very simply to me, you don't get it. Leadership is not about what you know. It's about ensuring to people above you that you can get the job done regardless of the circumstances. And every good leader in this business is smart enough to put people around them that are smarter than them. And as soon as he said that to me, I thought, oh, I can do that. I know how to put people around me that are smarter than me, and how to take in consideration what my leadership is looking for and take the ownership of making sure that gets done. And those two things sat with me very clearly. And I had the ability to do that. And that was essentially the rocket ship that I needed to know, that this wasn't a mystery. This wasn't something that people were schooled for. This was something that people got the opportunity to do. And so when I was in a role, my first leadership role as the general manager of the California Pizza Kitchen, I, in my mind at that moment, took on the responsibility of the restaurant's revenues, its inventories, the development of the team, where the expectations were going to be ultimately in growth and marketing, whatever it took. I didn't shrink from those responsibilities in fear. I looked for opportunity to learn from other people around me, and essentially started creating networks, which is where I think, in this world right now, is the strongest thing you can do when you're growing from your manager's mindsets into leadership roles, is creating networks around you of other leaders that you can observe from, you can bounce ideas off of, but understand that these decisions you're going to make, they're yours, and that you need to make the most logical decision you can make with your own research. So it becomes a very ownership-based idea when you're moving from management to leadership.
Yeah, I think you said the magic words in there about you took accountability for the expectations that you were placed on you. To summarize, you took accountability for the success of that restaurant inside that hotel. You weren't looking for, okay, what is the guidance? What are my instructions? What are my orders? You said, okay, leadership is about making sure this thing is successful, and I'm going to do what it needs to take, whatever it takes to get that done. And a lot of leaders really struggle with that. Is, oh, I need to accept that I've got this. I need to be able to go forward and say, I've got this, to my higher up leader in the chain. And I think that's such a critical piece of leadership. We expect young leaders to start to get that, and we want to mentor them to start to understand that. But we really expect our senior leaders, we expect to be able to say to them, here's your thing.
Yeah.
Go do it.
Yeah.
And Come tell me if you have a problem you can't solve on your own, right?
Well, there you go, right there. Managing up. Come tell me if you have a problem. See, the ownership of that scenario we were just talking about is realizing that when I grew in my leadership career, the reason why is I started seeing how the restaurant affected the hotel, not how the hotel was affecting my restaurant. And I started realizing that other restaurants in the hotel weren't necessarily creating as much revenue as mine, and that I could find ways of helping my leadership understand how to maximize that when I started seeing holistically how I was involved in a bigger picture. And I've shared that with teams as I coached them over the years so that they understood why leadership acts in a certain way. Sometimes we're offended by the fact that our leadership doesn't have the time to coach us 24/7 when we're in these situations, but to understand their roles and our roles is really valuable. And I always started with this in my catering teams. Let's just say as a coordinator, you have 20 tasks a day you have to get through to be successful in your day. As your manager, I may have 40 tasks a day that I have to get done. As the leader of the department, I may have 120 tasks that I need to get done that day. As a VP of the hotel, I may have 300, and as the president, I may have 1,000. Now, if you have 1,000 tasks in your day, nature dictates you better be good at delegating, because there is no way that you're going to get through 1,000 tasks on your own. So the development from the individual in a management role or in a salary role, growing into management, growing into leadership, is really accepting the fact that you have to involve others. 100% of your own efforts is nowhere near as valuable as 1% of 100 persons' efforts. And so if you can start to evolve yourself into the idea of how to create informal leaders in your team that maybe don't have the title, but have an instinct in them that you can nurture into leadership later on or management later on, these individuals could be one of those people that you're delegating to. And so it doesn't have to be within this rigid structure of title. It has to be in an awareness of what your values of your team is and how to put them in the right seats of the bus.
Yeah, one of the things new leaders struggle with so much is they feel like they've got to get everything done themselves. They want to be out front leading, and that's important at times, but there are other times you need to be focused on the strategic level, thinking big picture, and delegating so important to that. Remember, when we're leading people to achieve a shared vision. We're not just giving people things that we can't or don't want to do on our own, right? We're trying to put the best person on the best task, right? The right person on the right seat on the bus, the good to great thing.
Even in the world I'm in right now, Jason, taking it outside. So these skill sets I use now in my world, understanding that my clients, their leadership, their stakeholders, they're all part of the same team. And as a leader in this scenario, as being a meeting broker, my job is to be considerate towards all these factors in the equation, not just what my role is, and to see through it. I have a deal I'm doing right now up in Portland, and the client's able to see into their 24 program. We've got them into a citywide, signed off on 25 in the next few days. Things are good. But how are they seeing 26 in the relationship with the city then? Because the rebates aren't going to be the same. They're not even considering it, but I am. I'm having these conversations for the future for them already, so that when those questions come up, I'm able to help them negotiate and navigate through them without feeling like we're losing time. It's the same role I had as a leader at Bellagio when I was running the convention services market and catering market there, because if numbers weren't going well, it wasn't my boss's or the president's job to come and find my P&L and tell me things weren't going right. I was responsible to ensure that the business model was moving in the right direction. And I needed to learn how to manage up and to share and to see through the fact that my leadership doesn't have the time to see this right now. And it's my job to look forward in 2 years and let them know, hey, this is what could happen. Taking that ownership is really what moves you from a manager to a leader's mindset, and then growth from there.
Yeah, so important for managing up is not just to point out that there's a problem coming, but to say, this is how I've got that, boss. This is what I'm going to do unless you tell me otherwise, to make sure that we are prepared for this problem. This is how I'm going to run my world to make sure that we are advancing the business model of this larger organization.
Well, and take responsibility for that. A lot of us, I've got certain social factors in me that work in play sometimes. And when I'm in a setting, I'm OCD, ADD, I have dyslexia, all these things that as humans we deal with. There were times when I would be in a stressful scenario and my president or my VP is speaking to me about something and it sounds like white noise because I'm just flipped out. I don't know how to explain why I'm in this way, but I am. But naturally, as the person I am, I would go home at night and I would think about what they said and I would consider the circumstances of what they were talking about. And without fail, the next morning, I would always walk into their office before I started my day and I'd say, all right, boss, this is what I heard. Is that what you said? And they would look at me. A lot of times they go, no, that's not at all what I said. This is what I said. And I would be like, oh, got it. Not as bad as I thought. Or they would say, that's exactly what I said. And I would know how serious and impactful this situation was. And I was told once later on down my career that truly was the one step that I put in. They never saw anybody else ever do in their lives. Everybody always ran for fear and tried to figure it out on their own. Me? No way. Let's get a clear understanding what you expect me to do because I know this isn't personal.
Yeah, I hope everyone is paying attention to that. That's one, like if I could underline this or highlight this in the transcript, that's what I would do. It's so important to have that kind of relationship with your boss. And I learned that as a director of operations in an Air Force squadron. It's so important to try to build that kind of relationship with your boss and with the people reporting to you where they feel like they can come in and say, is this what you said? I want to make sure I've got it right before I go execute to make things work out great for you. And a lot of young leaders have a hard time doing that because they either don't want to look like they weren't listening, or they don't want to look like they haven't got it handled, or for whatever reason. But it's not about, going and it. Basically, you just want to go in and go, hey, I'm going to go do great things for you. I just want to make sure before I go do those great things, we're on the same page, right? Those conversations are so invaluable.
It's an ego thing.
And really, I'd love to see more of them.
We see it you see it in all avenues. What we're really getting down to is this idea of acceptance of other humans in your circle that can actually make a difference in your ability to grow. And I run into this circumstance out in my world now all the time where there's people in our industry that believe if they don't do it themselves, that the credibility behind that isn't given. And the truth is your leadership sees you as strong because you bring other people into the equation.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So any other thoughts? We've covered a lot of ground here. Any other thoughts or lessons from the big transition of lots of individual properties on the strip to when just a few big companies owned them? Was there any other lessons or changes in culture you saw during that time period?
I did. There was a time where Vegas was probably broken up into 11 different ownerships, and everybody was doing things different on the strip. Every hotel had its identity built behind the employees and the management that was in that hotel. And then when the bigger production of MGM started merging in with Mirage Resorts, which essentially combined those two companies, and Mirage had already partnered up with Circus at that point. So there's three big companies in Vegas that essentially had 80% of the hotels that merged together at that moment and really set themselves apart from essentially Caesars. There's two big competitors in Vegas. It's Caesars and it's MGM. Outside of that, it's just other players playing in that playground, but those are the two big ones. And I worked on the MGM side. Well, when I was coming up through the Golden Nugget, trained through Las Vegas, I used to call it, we were in these kind of groups. There would be an executive leader, some middle leaders, and they would groom some younger managers like myself and others that were in the scenario, and we would follow them into their roles, essentially is how it worked. And so you knew if a VP was going to another hotel, chances were you were going with them. When it merged with MGM, that completely changed. MGM had a whole different mindset on the idea of creating this universal feel that the hotels all fell under one umbrella and that they didn't have this uniqueness to each hotel that was competitive, but more of a mutual circumstance. And so we had to get really used to working with each other, collaborating, coming together, and really sharing ideas where we thought those were advantages. So, consider Bellagio. Our menus were written and everybody else in town essentially copied them because we would set the pace. If you were back east opening a hotel in Florida, chances are you took Bellagio's menus as a baseline of where your competitive model was and pricing. So we had that responsibility, But we also had to work with our counterparts, our sister properties, and we started to develop. Well, that's when I started really letting go of this competitive mindset that I had. I mean, at that point as a leader, I felt competition was the strongest way that I could present myself because I was fighting for the people that I was working for. But the truth was that wasn't a big enough vision. An inclusive leadership mindset is really where I started growing towards and understanding the advantages that everybody can win. It doesn't have to be Bellagio standing on top. As a company, if we all push up together, there was benefit for everybody to share, and committees started to be created, and different opportunities started coming through, and culture sets started changing. It really was a cool time to be in this city, because before that, there were two basic sets. There was the manager that was going to stay 7 years somewhere and grow their career to the next step and have a strong base and loyalty. And then there was those at that time that were jumping around. Every year and a half to 2 years, they would move. Both models had value. I followed the 7-year model. I think that's literally why I'm able to do what I am outside in this industry now, is because I took it so seriously that I actually created the model in the end. The ones that jumped around, though, they had this advantage of bringing outside perspective. And that was something that I never could really fight against because I only had inside perspective. And so it gave me this real holistic view, looking back now, that all these representations, they were part of the same equation that were pushing Vegas forward. And we were moving, from a city that was essentially where you would go to a buffet and see a show, and you'd go off strip to a nightclub or a fine dining restaurant, to everything was absorbed into the casino base. Las Vegas suffered dramatically for private business at that time because they took everything they could and put it inside of the building. They took all the nightclubs and put them inside.
We noticed.
And we went through this process at that time of how to keep the groups inside of a hotel and their experience completely within that hotel. Now look at where we're at. Vegas has evolved into a sports mecca. And being in Las Vegas now has nothing to do with the hotel you're staying in. It's the opportunities outside of the hotel that everybody's going there for. And so now the hotel models have had to shift out, and their conveniences are starting to evolve themselves back into the outside market because they can't hold those margins. They're not there for them anymore. So to see Vegas grow is really interesting over the years. There was a time where in this town, not one hotel had a parking garage. They were all flat lots right next to them. I mean, the Treasure Island literally was the parking lot for the Mirage when it was first built. And now to see that Blake Shelton's built a nightclub literally on a street corner across from the Bellagio is pretty impressive to think about how the land value in that area on the Strip has evolved. I mean, look at the Treasure Island, where that used to be a pirate show, and now it's a CVS. I wonder where the revenue change in that decision came from.
Yeah, there's definitely a maximizing revenue per square foot thing going on, but it's brought us lots of good stuff. And it has been interesting over the last 20, 25 years watching the change. So before we get off of your hotel resort career, I just want to give people an idea for the scope. We've been talking about some leadership stuff that sounds really good for like small teams, but I want to give people some scope about the size of the teams you were in charge of, who you were responsible for. When you were working at Bellagio, when you were wrapping it up for a career in corporate, how many people were you responsible for? How much money were you responsible for?
I had probably about 2,000 people reporting to me directly and indirectly through the department. If we had a great year, we hit 48 mil in Bellagio. That was a sizable number for us, and we needed all 12 months to get there. So I was the forecasting guy. I could tell you how long it took to get there. But every November, December, we were biting our nails for that big wedding to come in and round out the end. I found over the years that as a leader in that scenario, my biggest takeaway was the fact that I made eye contact and said hello to everybody that crossed my path all day long. I was never too busy to stop. I had great mentors that showed me this in the industry that were in executive levels, and they never didn't take the opportunity to stop and talk to somebody if they were willing to. And so I'd made it a habit from the very get-go to treat everybody as a friend the best I could as we were working in our day, to be in their world, to dig in and roll up the sleeves when I needed to, but to bring people to existence everywhere I could. And that really perpetuated over the years into my leadership strength. And when you really look at your leaders and your role models and what sets them apart, it's generally public speaking. they're comfortable getting in front of others, expressing themselves and what the action steps of other things are going to be. I saw it in the very beginning with Steve Wynn. And I looked around myself at all the presidents of the hotels and all the VPs I respected. And I realized that every one of them could get up in front of a crowd of people and can express themselves. And at that moment, I couldn't. So I dug in both feet, deep, and went into Toastmasters and anything I could to learn what that meant to really put myself in a place to be able to express myself to my teams and ensure that they were seeing the outcomes and the opportunities that they wanted to see and were heard. And I wasn't just focused on that end result, but I was part of the equation of growth along the way. And that it was a holistic idea of mindset. That was my biggest technique, was essentially to use that as a leadership step, but 2,000 people or more.
Yeah, and that's what I really want to emphasize there is, sometimes I hear these relationship building techniques, these, putting a lot of attention on people techniques work great for small teams, but not necessarily for much larger organizations. And I wanted to get your perspective on that. And it sounds like what actually helped you be really successful was these relationship minded techniques to being a leader.
Yeah, it's stature. In that 1,000, 2,000, I always include the group itself because they have employees that I'm dealing with and I'm coaching through the experience as well. So a lot of times in my week, the employees that I was indirectly, directly responsible for making sure outcome was well weren't even mine. They were my clients. And I had to work with that third party and my team to bring both those things together to ensure the outcome was moving forward at a very high level. And sometimes there were problems. And if there were, it was my role to step face first into that problem and to deal with the outcomes for my team and ensure that they knew that somebody was behind them that was going to really clear the air and get things moving in the right direction again.
One of the things I really like to ask people, like we've talked a lot about your leadership style, how you've approached leadership, but I'm a firm believer that our most important job as leaders is to build the leaders coming up behind us. What was your approach to building your teams when you had the choice on how you were going to build a team? How did you develop future leaders? What did you look for in future leaders? Tell me about how you kind of set the organization up for success for the day that you moved on from a position.
I was big about empowering. That was my real status. I went into every team that I worked in, and essentially I would create the understanding of what those, well, let's just take it from the very beginning. I would always allow myself to be interviewed by my new team when I would come in. And when I was being interviewed by my team, I would instinctively understand from the questions they were asking me in the interview of what their strengths were and what they had hopes for in their career. And I would key in on what their development growth was, what their intent, what their instincts and development growth were. Some employees didn't want to grow at the time. They were in family scenarios and they wanted to just know that they were protected and that they could make it through this time frame until they were ready to grow. Some others wanted to grow right now. They needed opportunity. And so I would go into the teams and I would find ways of creating roles for them that they can mentor others. And I would essentially set it up where every week we had a mastermind that would move down through the team, and every member of the team that had a different role and respect would exercise that. And then I would essentially go back and I would find out what the challenges were from what they were exercising. And they would feed back up to me what their issues were. And I would focus on those as my direct action steps so that we would improve. So we had this flow of information that would come up and down, but it was always very linear. It always had the idea of where it started and where it was going so that people could learn from it. It wasn't just how it worked best for you. So sometimes there was some growth in there, and we needed to understand as a team we were doing it this way so that we were interchangeable in a lot of ways. But essentially, I use this system of creating their own momentum in the avenues of where they wanted to see their growth and their action steps. And then I would be honest with them. You know, we would have our yearly and quarterly reviews, and we would dig in and decide where the things were that we were afraid of, that we weren't approaching, and what we weren't afraid of and what we could do more of. And I found that as long as I was always focused on growth and their individuals' need of growth, that my teams were always successful.
I love that. I love when we get to talk about how you don't need a fancy title or a big paycheck to be a leader. You don't need to wait till that day that you get an important title to be a leader. You can be a leader anytime, and it sounds like you really fostered that on your teams by helping them, encouraging them to be mentors to other employees, even though they didn't have a fancy title or a supervisory position. So fantastic.
I always saw this from a place where I watched this gentleman one day walk out of his role out of a hotel with his suit jacket over his arm and very casual saying goodbye to us when I was working in the restaurant business. And I thought to myself, that's what I want right there. I want that. But it really resonated me with my teams, where I would help them understand that, look, you're setting an example for somebody around you that you don't know is watching you. And they aspire to the idea of what you're doing in management and leadership, without a doubt. So understand that you're setting this example every day to people that are watching you that you don't even know. Take pride in that. Give them this ability to realize that they can achieve this, and make sure that you're setting an example that they don't find fault in, so that you can really give them the best chance that they have at being themselves.
I couldn't agree more, because if you say you want something, but you set an example of the opposite, your team picks up on that, and they follow your actions, not your words. So it's very important. So I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to get a little bit personal, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
For a long time, you struggled with a fear of people finding out you were dealing with dyslexia and OCD and ADD. And how did that impact your work?
Well, I tell you, I didn't realize how much it did until I stepped outside of the industry, and now I'm on this side of the coin, because I embrace these as my strengths. But it was challenging, I'll have to say. I found in the higher leadership roles that communication and how you present yourself is very strongly criticized and analyzed by your peers. And a few mistakes or a few slip-ups in the way that you pronounce something, or you're presenting something, could really offset the way they see you. I don't think it's necessarily fair, but it was the way it was. And so my dyslexia, especially when I would get up to the front of the executive boardroom, and we were in our executive meeting with the 12 leaders of the company, and I was in a position to have to present something creative about my department, where it was going. A lot of times my brain moves a little faster than my mouth. And as a dyslexic individual, I have a very a picture that's very eclectic in my head, but I understand it, and to bring it from that through language to an outcome and understanding to other individuals, I'd use a lot of analogies and a lot of similarities in conversation to bring these thoughts through. And it made me very nervous, because I knew their personality types were very analytical and they were very spreadsheet oriented. And how does this person, myself, in this scenario, find advantage when I'm out of my comfort zone? And it always felt that way. But one day I was at this lunch with this very intelligent individual. He's a great guy named Christopher Pizer. And Christopher was very cautious not to speak in a way, because he's very analytical, that we would not have a common conversation. But one day he did. He shot up out of it. He was talking about how he was creating this program to integrate two different things in the hotel. And in my world, from an operational perspective, I'm just hearing white noise. And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, bud," I said, "you are super smart." I said, I'm lost what you're talking about." And he looked at me directly and he said, "Dean, I've seen you get hundreds of people to move in one direction, and nobody will listen to me." And I said to him, I said, "Wow, it takes all of us, doesn't it?" And he said, "You're darn right it does." And that was the day I realized that being my best self was the fact that I was dyslexic, I'm OCD and ADD. And the funny thing about our industry, if you really look around yourself in the events industry, most of us are OCD and ADD. That's why we gather in this industry. It's part of the idea of being social. And looking back now on some of these things that I saw and I was hiding, now I think about it, here I am in my best life. The picture is perfect in the suit and all the other things, and yet I'm fearful inside that somebody's going to figure this out everywhere I go. I mean, I'm not my best self in that scenario. And I realized later that because I'm dyslexic is the reason I became a leader. It was because I have different ways of spatially seeing things, and I was able to attach to people in a way that's very empathetic, and I understand and can feel in those scenarios. And those were my advantages in life, not knowing those at the time in a structured world. they always felt like it's something I should hide. But now that I realize that really, truly, that was what made me me, I implore anybody in the world that's in these situations in a corporate setting to express themselves to the leadership around them and make sure that they understand what they are inside. Because when you release that fear and you become all of yourself, man, nothing can stop you. You are absolutely perfect in that scenario. And you can enjoy your life without that fear and intimidation inside of hiding from others in a way that they're hiding from you too. Everybody has something in this scenario. It's just that we get so caught up in trying to be perfect about ourselves and presenting ourselves that way that we lose the best of ourselves. And so, yeah, for my whole existence and career, I dealt with these things all the way through every avenue of my life until most recently in the last year, I was able to go back and realize that these are actually my strengths. These are the things that make me really great at what I do right now. And because I'm OCD, I'm amazing at contracts. I mean, everything I look at a contract has to be in a certain way. And the details of a conference, I've seen a million of them. So they need to be in a way that they're efficient and making money. So these things keep me very focused in that respect. As far as my ADD, come on. I mean, realistically, in the events industry, we don't have time when you're dealing with 1,000 action steps to dig into every single one of them. So we have to be able to move quickly, take in consideration what we're dealing with, and put action steps behind it to get to the next one. So really, it just keeps me focused and knowing that I've got things around me that need to move as fast as they have to. And being dyslexic, wow. The truth is, I didn't realize as a dyslexic learner in elementary school that I wasn't really reading words. I was associating words into icons, into symbols. And that's how a dyslexic person associates information, is they look at that paper, computer screen, and those are symbols to them. And when they're associated in a certain way, they mean something. And so I can see big blocks of information and understand things without having to actually analyze the whole block of information, knowing how everything's aligned. When I'm dealing with a client in a conference, when they start to speak to me, this vision in my head of a huge architectural template of that conference starts to develop. And by the time we're done, everything has a room, what's going on in that room. I could walk through the door and tell you all this information is aligned in a certain way that now I realize years later is the reason why I was amazing in the convention industry. That is just so many pieces of the pie that you have to figure out. How do you organize that? It was literally the way I thought that helped me do that. And so now I really embrace this. I understand that the funny thing about the universe is it kind of puts you into the places of life that you're supposed to be. And that's why you associate that way. If you just dive into it with both feet and realize that you're in the right place always at the right time, you're going to find the fact that these are your strengths, not your weaknesses.
Yeah, it sounds like you were able to find that strength in who you really are. And it also, once you embrace that, it helped you let go of a lot of fear that you had. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's a fantastic lesson for all of us to, when you embrace who you are, you can let go of the fear of people finding out the things you're afraid they're going to find out, if you can find a way to make them strengths or find out how they are strengths for you. Mm-hmm. So you had a fantastic and amazing career in the hospitality industry, and then you shifted to becoming an entrepreneur. What was the story there? Why the transition?
Wow. And why, right? Why would you do this after all those years? And I can't tell you how many people looked at me and said, Dino, you've achieved everything you wanted in your career. You're sitting exactly where you want to be, and now you're going to leave. I had, I don't know how to say this, but I've always had this something inside of me that just knew it needed to do more. And I was seeing from the hotel side, a lot of times the clients weren't getting the same deal as another client would get. I don't want to use the word fair. It just wasn't across the board. I realized that your knowledge and understanding is what dictated the best deal. And I was working with a lot of people that never asked the right questions, and so they didn't get the deal they should have gotten. So I was compelled to see how I could go out into the industry and really make a difference in offering this information and what it meant. At the time, I didn't know how much value might be behind it. I didn't even know if there was an advantage in understanding all these things. Of course, in my business, it has become a tremendous advantage to understand how all these things work. And so I left MGM Resorts International back in 2019. They were going through what everybody called MGM 2020. Wasn't a good time in Las Vegas. There was a lot of resetting. The pandemic was just around the corner, and I just got this gut instinct that I shouldn't be at the hotel anymore doing what I was doing. My team was running well. I had learned and taught what I needed to. And every day I got up, it was getting closer and closer to this really uncomfortable feeling that I needed to leave. And I think we've all been in those situations in our life, and we're scared to death because we don't know what that means. But I had mastered in my mind the idea of the staircase. I understood what it took to get to the next step and how to do it. I was very confident that if I was to approach anything in life, that I was going to be successful in my mindset to it, my goals. But I thought, why not do your life differently at this point? You know, I mean, you've raised your kids; they're great adults. You've done the career. You know, your wife and you don't need a lot to say that you're comfortable and enjoying your life. Why don't we just throw this up in the air and give it to the universe and see how it's going to work for you, and see what the avenues and directions take you in? And so all of this idea and where I ended up with working with Meetings Made Easy and being a meeting broker, it was not something I had planned. It fell into place by different circumstances that came into play. And when I realized what it was offering me, I couldn't even believe it. I had met a person doing what I'm doing right now 20 years ago in the business. This person walked through the Mirage. He was on a site visit. I asked him what he did for a living. He said, I just make sure my clients' programs fit in hotels and that they're protected in their contracts. At the time, I was an operations guy. I had no idea what that meant. I looked at him like, that's got to be the coolest job in the world. And I felt that ping that we all feel when something like that happens. It went ting. And I thought, whoa, what's that? And I heard this little voice say to me, if you really want that lifestyle, then you just need to make everybody your friend from this point forward. They're no longer clients, and you're no longer working at the Mirage. You're in a career that you can learn to holistically invest yourself into. And so I did. That's what happened. Now, that didn't create the business when I got out, but it created an idea of the mindset that I had already been on this path the whole time, not even knowing it. And so I developed this confidence in knowing that, okay, now I'm in the right place at the right time. Instead of looking at it like a staircase, look at it like the rings in a tree. You're never in the wrong place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right place at the wrong time. And I had to say to myself, well, if this is true, Dino, then it's really about enjoying the adventure rather than being right about what you're doing. So how are you going to do this? And I said to myself, well, I guess when I started in these other hotels and I had these other careers, there was always this place where I had to start over. Whether I went from my operational career to catering, I had to go back as a coordinator. I left probably 40 grand a year on the table when I did that. But because I did that, life grew and doubled up, I said. Mm-hmm. When I left catering in Bellagio and went into services and ran the department, I didn't realize the value I was going to get out of, understanding how the department ran physically, whether we were doing upgrades in carpet or tapestries or furnitures, or how we integrated our department with the engineering team and how we kept things in working order, and we PM the room for big groups. All this stuff to me were things that kind of came out of the idea of embracing what it was that I was getting into. And so when I got out and started doing meeting broker, I just said to myself right off the bat, Dino, you got to start over. You're a coordinator in this business. Accept the fact that most of your clients are not going to be very large scale, that you're going to have to learn this business and how to help them first, and then grow from there. And the next step, taking the analogy of being a catering manager, I thought was to get out and travel, really experience what people are going through when they go to these areas. And that was an amazing exercise for me, because it turned from how I was viewing things to seeing how others were viewing things to understanding how a group would view this. And I was able to see these templates like I did when I worked at the hotel and said, all right, we're in Cancun. This is how it works. Operationally, these are the steps. Okay, we're in Europe. This is how it works. We're on the East Coast. We're in Florida. We're in the Caribbean. Wherever it is, there was these ways things worked. And so I went out and physically learned those. Then I had to essentially adapt myself into what this business was going to be, and I had to get serious about what my steps were. And I realized that reverse engineering, I had gone through 4 pillars in my mind of how I was able to grow. The first was releasing my fear. it's scary. You're not getting a paycheck every week. You have to wait until commissions come in from a group that actualized 2 years before. So revenue isn't consistent. Your lifestyle isn't consistent. And one of the strongest things I came out of that step was becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. Realizing that the magic of the universe and how my life was working, others' lives worked, is when you put yourself in uncomfortable situations and when you're not in control of what's going on around you, and I could fill this with tons of stories, that's what really starts to address these interior things that you're afraid of that keep and hold you back. And I knew, as being an entrepreneur and my CEO of my own business, that I couldn't have fear as a determining factor anymore. It couldn't be something I was working on. It had to be something I exercised through. And I identified my strongest weakness was I wasn't very good at sales. I was a relationship type person. So for me to build a business in the way I was doing it, it would take me about 15 years. I'm going to be too old to enjoy it by then. I said, I got to ramp up. I've got to figure out how people think, why they think that way, and how to get the value of what I'm doing in front of them so that they could see it for themselves without feeling intimidated, pressured, and see it as a value. And so that took some work. I had to read a lot. I went, found a ton of books and everything I could find. One of them was Never Split the Difference. What a great book that was.
Mm-hmm.
But really just digging in and understanding what it meant to be involved in this. The second was embracing human nature. I didn't understand that, I was going to act a certain way and people were going to act a certain way. And when you're reaching out, trying to ask somebody to get on a phone call to explain to them why you're going to be able to help them do something they're already doing, that's very difficult. Even if it's free, it doesn't matter because there's pretense built around that. So it needs to be done in a certain way. So there's value, again, behind it that they can see. I had to expand my personal perspective. I had to realize just being the executive at Bellagio wasn't good enough anymore for people. That to be a meeting broker, I had to learn how to be an amazing meeting broker. And that my past and my experience was an amazing template of knowledge that I could use, but it didn't actually make me a meeting broker. I had to learn what that was and embrace that. And then ultimately, my biggest lesson I've learned coming out was investing in collaboration. I had to go back to that, in understanding that if I involved myself in the energy of 100 people's efforts rather than 100% of my own efforts every day, that things were going to start to fall in place and really create an atmosphere. And so I like to use these examples now that I invest into the etherical bank of our future every day by just investing and just spending the time that I spend with people as honestly and as graciously as I can to be there to help them and to find value behind these things. Honestly, it's brought me to a place of life where I'm really now enjoying and embracing, the joy behind it rather than the exercise of the things that happen. And when you invest yourself in what I would call the lifestyle now, and you're in a place where you're able to live in a free way, that you're essentially deciding every day what you're going to invest in yourself and how you're investing in yourself, the outcome of that is just priceless to me. It's just been an amazing place to be in, but it didn't happen because I just wanted it to. It really happened because I've invested myself over the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years now, into taking this seriously like I did every job I had on the corporate side. There needs to be these things in place that you do that really push that energy forward.
Well, I don't think there's any better description of what it's like to be an entrepreneur just getting started out, and what are the things that all entrepreneurs really need to embrace and sometimes get over and get past in themselves to really be a successful entrepreneur. I think it's going to be fantastic advice for a lot of our audience. What was the best mistake you've ever made, or one of the best mistakes you've ever made, and what did you learn from it?
Wow, what's going to come to me on that one? I was on the corporate side. I accidentally let a very large band play a concert at our pool at Bellagio. And that evening, it was so impactful that we ended up comping a lot of rooms in one of the towers and in some of the restaurant reservations at Michael Mina. And I considered that a mistake because I didn't ask enough questions in the beginning to understand what was coming out to the pool as entertainment for that group that evening. However, the next day when the president of the hotel and we had this conversation about it, what really came out was they were impressed that I had pushed the limit so much, that I allowed it to happen. And that what the real result of it was not me necessarily getting in trouble, but finding new margins that we had to stay within, the dB levels of the band, and understanding what the intensity of that would be in the future. So the mistake itself really proved to me that there was so much more on the other side of these scenarios if we can get ourselves out of the way and realize it's about the opportunity to learn from this experience. I mean, experiential learning to me is the strongest thing that we can really import in our lives. It goes back into, those 4 things I was just talking about. You can go to a workshop and you can read these books. They'll give you insight, but to get out in the world and really travel to the destinations and understand how they work and they think, that's really what I felt from this mistake at the Bellagio that day, is that, I'm not in a position to lose my job every day. I don't need to come in and worry about the 5 things that are going to happen. What I really should do is focus on the 5 things that I can improve, because that's just going to make the next day even better. And so you start to accept this place you are in life rather than the circumstances of it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's great that you were in an environment where you could take risks, manage risk, and then when a risk, I don't even think you could say this risk didn't pay off. I think there were lessons learned out of it, and your leadership treated it just so. Okay, we learned some things from this. Now we know how to do this better going forward. So I think that whether it's self-evaluation or we're helping someone on our team or a peer do some of that evaluation of, hey, we learned some stuff out of this. Don't beat yourself up. That's a pretty valuable lesson, and another one that sometimes takes leaders a long time to learn.
Yeah.
So who is someone or something that has shaped your views on leadership?
Oh, wow. I have to give it to my good friend Harvey Stern, and maybe the president of the Bellagio when I was there, Randy Morton, Olivia Brown, the GM, Anna Marmondo, who's our VP of sales, or VP of food and beverage. They showed me what passion and will and responsibility of self is. At the time when I started there, I was playing both sides against the middle almost on everything I did. So if I walked into a conversation with a boss, I was instinctively good enough at sniffing out how they felt about something and kind of shifting into their court. It always seemed to work good for me. But something happened when I got to that place of my natural ability ran out. I don't know how to say that exactly right, but I had always lived on my natural ability my whole life, schooling, whatever it was. And it always worked because I found myself at the top of that percentile that I was hoping to be in. But there became a certain point where I was invested into this role of life where it went way past what I had ever done before. And I had to take in consideration, like, look, there's no pretenses to templates again. This isn't something I can use a past experience to say, this is how I'm going to do it. I have to jump in this now and create 3 actionable steps that I'm going to move forward with in the idea of this theory, and understand the outcome of it is the responsibility that I put forth. Coaching teams and really investing myself into the idea of how people were growing around me. These were the kind of things that they taught me that essentially it moved me to this one point in life. And I'll share this story with you. I was interviewing for a job over at the Park MGM. And at the time, I wasn't really sure if I was going to stay in the industry that long. But I went through the steps of going over there. And my big pitch on every interview was, it was time for Dino to be seen as what Dino can do. I don't want to work in the shadows of these other leaders anymore. I want to stand out in the idea of this consideration. And I went through all the interviews till I got to the last one, and the president of the hotel and I were interviewing, Patrick Miller, really great guy. And I said the same thing to him. And he looked at me and he said, Dino, let me give you a piece of advice. You go back today and be Dino. And it was offensive to me because I knew I didn't get the job when he said that. But secondly, I had to accept the fact that I had modeled myself after others' expectations. and then I didn't really have my own model. I was looking to go somewhere to do that. It took me a couple months to really reflect back in on what it meant. But truly what I realized he was saying and I embraced was I knew the difference between good action steps and action steps that were not good. And if I was going to make the decisions with my teams to do things in a certain way, it was because I believed that that was a successful way of going. I didn't any longer have to worry about that somebody was going to come to me and ask me, why did I do it that way? That was my biggest fear, is I was always going to be questioned, why did I do it that way? But the truth was, as long as I did it the way I thought was the best way, then I could learn from the outcome of that. Then no longer did I need to be fearful of things happening around me that I wasn't catching before they happened. And I was able to start investing myself into circumstances of meetings, outcomes where I was really tuned in. I understood where we were trying to get to. I'd been there long enough to tell you where everything, the costs were and bottom lines and outcomes would be. But I never was comfortable enough of making statements unless they fell in line with other leadership, because I was always just afraid that I was going to fall out of alignment. When I was taught to speak my mind and be myself under all circumstances, it was the strongest growth step I'd ever gone through. And I think truly today is the reason why I'm great at what I do for my clients as a meeting broker, is because when I realized that I was able to control that and make that decision on my own and choose that direction rather than being forced into a place that I thought others had created for me, magic started happening. I started becoming valued for quirky things, even, fun things that you do. People like you for being you, but when you're masked so much into a professionalism that you're just hard shelled into this idea because you're afraid everybody's going to find out around you that there's some pieces of you that maybe don't fit just equally like everybody else's. Well, those are the magic parts of who you are. That's what really starts to draw the community and the value behind these conversations that you're in. And really, at the end of it, you're going to find that truth, that's where the balance really starts. And I got to tell you, the difference between the world I live in now and the world I used to live in is, I like to joke, I have a morning pre-shift with the universe every day before I get started. So much like we would all have a meeting with our teams, I have a meeting with the universe, and we spend about 40 minutes together and align ourselves. And then I get up every day and I start from there. And so no longer do I need this collective around me to make me feel balanced by their reactions and outcomes. I now know where I sit just by my own truth. And it's reversed and flipped back out the other way, where energy now is pushing out of me instead of me taking in all this energy. And the health, hey, I used to run 100 plus on the heart meter there when I go to the doctor, work in the hotel side, just running from fear. And now sitting in the 90s, enjoying the strategies of those life decisions.
Yeah, I think, you've said such powerful things. I think there's a really valuable lesson about what true integrity and true accountability really are, and how when you embrace I'm going to share what I truly think and believe is the right thing to do here. I'm going to put together the plan to make that happen. I'm going to own the outcomes regardless of that, and I'm going to stand up for myself instead of looking where the wind is blowing and then kind of fitting our own plans or actions into where the wind is blowing. That's real true integrity and accountability, and some leaders never really find that. So you're a few years into the company, you've got big things coming up. What keeps you up at night, whether it's as an entrepreneur or a leader? What are the things that you're worried about, and how are you tackling those?
The industry that we're in right now went through a dramatic shift 3 years ago. A lot of the I'll say the knowledge base of the events industry went out and found other jobs or evolved into other aspects. And what I know the hotel industry to be is not fully functional compared to where it was. And so I know that the industry is in flux right now. And my biggest concern for my clients especially is decisions made on a bottom line rather than the truth of outcome. And so I tirelessly try and educate around that if we're making a decision because the rate is a certain price point and a hotel is a hotel, chances of failure have increased 90%. if we're making logical decisions on why we're going somewhere because of the outcomes and what the expectations are, then we've reduced it to 40%. It's just a matter of operational and how we've set that up. And so I find in the middle there that's really where I sit. That's why I'm a guest in podcasts with you as well, and having these conversations, is that when I was, journeyman into my career before, I felt a responsibility to guide and coach teams. I mentioned Toastmasters. That's an amazing place to be, to help mentor others and look for mentorship yourself. Workshops. The company would give us opportunities to be in places that we could hold workshops so that we could help coach our employees. I stay up at night, investing myself into future thoughts of how can I be more available. I'd like to do some stage work this year and get out in front of some human beings and really share some of these messages and growth steps just in the industry itself, knowing that there's value behind that. I'm not really looking for anything from any of this. I just know that it's a part of what my place is in this industry, the collective industry, the whole idea of what we are in the events industry. I feel my role is to be there and share and help grow and nurture the best I can.
Very cool. Very cool. What is someone or something you're grateful for?
I am extremely grateful for my good friend, Mike Ferreira. He is the CEO of Meetings Made Easy. He blazed a trail 7 years ago on his own and showed that with the right will and desire, there's a place for all of us that we can really experience and be ourselves. He's given us as independent brokers with Meetings Made Easy this opportunity to put ourselves forward and be a part of the industry aside from the company itself that we're so grateful to be a part of. That's a business one. And a personal one, I have a 33-year-old wife, or 33-year wife that I couldn't have done any of this without. She's just an amazing person. She keeps me alive. Let's just say it that way, because if I was left to my own wares, all I would do was work. I mean, that's just what I love to do for some reason. But she shows me the light in life outside and around that. We live on 5 acres about 45 miles south of Reno right now. So she's outside with 13 chickens and a goat, messing around with them, trying to get things organized. We live on 5 acres out here with a bunch of farmers and cowboys. And so we're really enjoying this idea of life that isn't built into where I came from out of Las Vegas, where it's all so action-packed and fast and furious every day. But to see that there's this balance around you, that a lifestyle that you enjoy, something really truly to be appreciative of. It has nothing to do with revenue or money. It's just the idea that you're being allowed to be the best you can be in all aspects of it.
Well, it's great. It's always great when we have someone who gets our head out of the blinders and reminds us that there's more to life than the projects that we're passionate about. I think that's wonderful. What's some advice you would give to future leaders, whether they're in corporate, whether they're entrepreneurs, whether there's someone who's thinking about making the transition from corporate to entrepreneurship? Any advice for them?
Address what your goals are truthfully, from the inside out. I've said this a lot to friends of mine. The secret to life are really the questions that you're not willing to ask yourself on the inside. There was years I smoked cigarettes, and obviously not good for me. And so I never asked myself if I was going to quit, because if I did, then I would have to. Until the day I asked myself, are you going to do this the rest of your life? And the answer was no. And so to expect that anything is expected in this world is never going to happen. But to invest yourself into your life, everything will happen. And, I know that's very high level food, woo-woo type ways of saying it. But the truth is, it was like every other experience I took in a new job. There were always these steps of investment. And if you look at any entrepreneurial scenario, it's 5 years. Don't be disillusioned that you're going to find success in the first year in a way that's going to make you feel like this is your business for the rest of your life. Very few. And in your second year, what you're probably going to learn is point-to-point sales aren't really where you want to go. You want to start to look at, these relationships that are collaborative and start to invest yourself into other organizations and communities and finding that. That's your second. And your third year is realizing that you are in this and it is happening, and you're probably going to lose that hype that you had in the beginning that you thought was going to get you there. And now you really got to settle in and understand you're just building BEOs in your office like you were as a catering manager at one point. And you got to put the time in. It's just part of the equation. But when you finally get to that place where you're able to create income for yourself from your own efforts, all of it is worth it. And I can't tell you why this happens, but the universe reciprocates after about 4 years, and it says to whatever the equation you're in, this person is serious. They're not going to give up. And so we're going to have to start feeding this thing, whatever that is. And it starts to feed you into it. Don't be disillusioned that you're doing something. You're part of something. And the more you invest yourself into it, it's just like the idea of working in those walls before. I like to look at LinkedIn as the building I used to work in without walls. And LinkedIn is my favorite place to be on a daily basis because I have friends in there that we've helped each other, and we've created these communities around each other where we can actually grow. And I say that when you're reaching out on a post and you're giving somebody a like, you're literally walking into their office and handing them a flower in their office that day when they were getting to know you. And think about every job you've ever been in. When you first get there, you're a small fish in a big sea, and you're needing to get to know everybody. And by the second year, hopefully they've started to understand there's somebody with your name down there doing something. And by the third year, hopefully you're not your title anymore, but you're this representative that has knowledge that they're reaching out to. Call Dino. He knows everything. And then when you're in these scenarios, you start to grow into that fourth and fifth year of understanding that everything you've ever done has turned out the same way. It's always those pre-investments of commitment. So everybody's heard this before. And I know it doesn't mean much to say it's a 5-year progress, but I have to say that if you don't have the mindset that you're willing to invest yourself into at least that long, how is anything going to take you that seriously?
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Fantastic advice. Where can everybody find you and Meetings Made Easy? What else do you want us to know about you and Meetings Made Easy? And what exciting things do you have coming up?
Well, brother, I have an event in Nashville we're hosting coming up at the end of the month. I'm doing a hockey event for my clients and some new friends that are in the Nashville area. If you're actually there, I have a seat or two left. I'd be happy to put you in. Following that, I'll be in IMEX Frankfurt coming up in May. We're going to be across the pond again and enjoying our friends in Germany. Meetings Made Easy. You can always find me in my email address, dfisher@meetingsme.com. The best place to look me up is LinkedIn. That's my daily go-to.
We've got all that info. We'll put that in the show notes in the YouTube description here. Frankfurt is a great city. I think you're going to have a great time. May or June is a perfect place to be there. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've been to Frankfurt. Dean, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, all of you, for watching us. Please reach out to Dean on LinkedIn and thank him for joining us today. If you liked Dean, please check out some of our other videos and our other interviews on the channel here. Please like, comment, and share if this was helpful to you or you liked it. Please send it on to someone who you think could use all the great advice that Dean had for us today. We love bringing you these interviews, so please keep watching. Onward and upward.
Thank you, everyone.